time for one of my favorite series, the Screen Share series with newsletter creators. Today we have Josh Spector. Welcome, Josh.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I am so excited because this is a reschedule from April. Because we had Josh lined up for Newsletter Fest, and then things just didn't align. Everybody's had, a 2021, 2020, 2021 type year. Like, this is a season of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we got on this call, I wish I had record already pressed, because we had this moment where we're like, finally.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming.
Yes. So you are the founder, the creator of For the Interested, and you are an audience growth strategist and consultant. And the way I found out about you was through Facebook. I landed in your newsletter creators Facebook group. So everybody, if you're not in that group, go find it. He spits wisdom on the regular, and people in that group spit wisdom and engage and connect. So it's a great place for newsletter creators to connect. Today, we're going to talk about his transition. He went from a weekly newsletter to the weekly still comes out, but now he also has a daily newsletter that is the same one, but it's like a smaller snippets, right? And so we're going to kind of talk about that transition and how that's worked out. But first, like, tell me what led you to this Zoom? Like,
sure.
A nutshell.
So my background is I've worked in journalism and marketing and social media. I live in Los Angeles. I've worked in the entertainment industry for about, hard to believe, but about 20 years. So that's sort of my background. And my last sort of full-time job was I ran digital media and marketing for the Academy of Motion Pictures and the Oscars. And so I did that from like 2011 to 2016. And in 2016, I left to become a full-time consultant, basically, and help people grow their audiences and businesses using social media, newsletters, and all kinds of stuff like that. So I have had various newsletters and blogs over the years, but in 2016, when I left, I started For the Interested, which was sort of an evolution of other stuff that I had done before. And what For the Interested is at that time, it was a weekly newsletter that went out on Sundays that featured ideas to help creators produce, promote, and profit from their creations. So typically, it's a curated newsletter that usually would feature I write one original blog post a week. So that would be in there. And then I would curate links and summaries to other articles, videos, podcasts to help creators. So I launched that in 2016. I have published it every Sunday, except for the weekend I got married, ever since. So I think this week is going to be issue 272, which is kind of crazy. I built a good sized audience for it. Right now it's around 18,000 subscribers. And it has definitely evolved over time. Initially I was featuring links to 10 articles, and at some point I cut it down to 5. Like all newsletters, you sort of find your way as you go. And I start, from a monetization perspective, the main source of my revenue is consulting, but over time, especially in the past couple of years, I've started to monetize with ads in the newsletter. I sell info products, and I launched I call it collection of resources, but it's really like a paid newsletter called This Is How I Do It, which is a weekly where I give a sort of deep dive into how I do something in my audience or in my business and to grow my audience. But the daily, which I think is what we're going to sort of primarily focus on today, has been really interesting. And this was a shift I made, just probably started maybe 4 or 5 months ago as an experiment, and then has become a sort of full expansion of my newsletter just within the past maybe 2 months.
Mhm.
So let me start with sort of where it originated. So I would have a lot of my consulting clients are people who have newsletters, or they're growing newsletters, or they're trying to figure out what to do with the newsletter. And I would find myself I work with a lot of independent creator types, and entrepreneurs, some small businesses and some sort of bigger stuff. But for the most part, it's kind of independent creative types. And so I would have these conversations, and everyone has an assumption about what a newsletter has to be. So that word, it's interesting. Everyone carries their own perceptions. And so I would have conversations with, let's say, I used to work with the one example that I have in my mind is like a comedian, and this comedian was like, I know I need to grow an email list, I know I need a newsletter, but like I don't want to sit down and write a newsletter every week. Like that feels like a lot of work. And one of the things I would say to him and people like him is like, you need to reframe in your mind what a newsletter is or can be. That I was like, all that matters is that you're sending people something valuable and that they appreciate getting. And I used to say over and over again, like, your newsletter could be one sentence. And as long as that sentence was good and valuable, it could be one sentence and a link to, like, and I, in the comedian example, I was like, people are following you and connected with you because they think you're funny. They probably would appreciate whatever else you think you find funny. Like, so I was like, when you hear a newsletter, I was like, just even if you wrote a sentence and you were like, hey, here's a funny video that I saw this week, I always had this theory that I was like, it could work. And I was like, actually, as long as you're sending stuff that's good, I actually think people would love it because everyone's pressed for time. And, like people like the idea that sort of less is more. And in my own mind, like I subscribe to a ton of newsletters and love the format, but I also realized that there were newsletter, that the sort of shorter and briefer the newsletter was, the more likely I was to open it whenever I saw it in my inbox. That there were other newsletters that I was like, oh, this is great, but there's so much, I know if I open it, like this is going to be a big commitment, right? So like, and I mean this as a compliment, not a criticism, but what's his name? Dan Oshinsky, the Not a Newsletter. That is an amazing resource. But when I get it, a lot of times I hesitate to open it because I know like this is going to be an hour long. Like I will open it eventually, but compared to other newsletters where I'm like, oh, this is going to be a quick read, a quick whatever. So I had all those things sort of kicking around in my head. And then in the meantime, I'm writing my newsletter and, I'm finding all sorts of stuff. But there was a lot of stuff that either maybe it was interesting, but not an exact fit for what I do in my newsletter, or it sort of didn't, maybe didn't quite, fit in that. It wasn't one of the top 5 things I was going to share or whatever. And so I started a separate newsletter as a complete experiment with no concept that I would ever ultimately merge it into For the Interested. So I started this newsletter, I called it the Daily Graph. And the concept was basically one paragraph instead of one sentence. I give myself a little more room.
Yeah.
I was like, it's going to be a one paragraph. I say daily, but it's really weekdays. A one paragraph, daily weekday newsletter. And I was also wary of, I know how much work a newsletter can be. Even I was like, I don't, a daily is a big commitment. So I was like, let me just sort of try this. Let me see if people like it. Let me see how hard it is for me to like write and put up with and whatever. And I started putting it out and I really liked writing it. The constraint of like, this is only going to be a paragraph and sometimes it's only going to be a sentence. I found myself, it was very sort of freeing because you're basically like, just get to the chase. Like, I don't need to summarize it. I can just go like, wow, this is really going to blow your mind. If you want to learn how to do X, Y, Z, done. Right. Very quick and easy to write. I was able to schedule it way in advance because of that. So, I'm typically working several weeks or a month ahead. So I don't feel that pressure of, oh, every day I've got to come up with something. So it was very manageable. And the feedback I got, the open rates were really high. The engagement and the link clicks when I shared a link were massive. Like, to give you, and I'll talk about that in a second, but, and it worked. And so I I was promoting it in my newsletter and saying, hey, check out this daily graph thing if you want to do it. And it had gotten to the point where I had, somewhere between like 1,500 and 2,000 subscribers for it after I'd been doing it for a couple months.
Mm-hmm.
And people really liked it. And I was getting really great feedback, and I realized it was feasible. And so I was at this point where I was like, I'm trying to grow this thing, but I have 18,000 people over here who I think will like it. So I'm trying to get them to opt in. And like anything, some of them do, like I know they'll like it, but or I could flip a switch and just go, I'm going to just start sending it to everybody, basically merge the two and go, my weekly is now also this one paragraph weekday version.
Mm-hmm.
And basically let people opt out as opposed to opting in. So that's what I decided to do, because I was like, it's going to take forever to try to grow this other thing. Why not just do it? And if it costs me some subscribers, or, again, I let people opt out if they only want to get the Sunday and don't get the weekday one.
Okay. So that's a workflow they can go through, is like, manage my subscription cadence.
Well, yes and no. It's a little, so when I first did it, I was like, I'm going to start, you're going to start getting weekday editions. If you don't want them, opt out here. Like, check it out for a week. If you don't want it, I'll send you a thing and you can click to opt out.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't gone so far as to do a like manage your settings thing. So, but if anyone, I get people that occasionally will email me and be like, hey, can I just get the Sunday? So I'll do that sort of manually.
Right.
So I allow them to opt out, but I wouldn't say I necessarily promote the opt out.
Mm-hmm.
And, to be honest, like, yes, some people have left, but for the most part, people really like it. The number of people that opted out was relatively small. It cost me some subscribers. Just, one of the big differences, like any newsletter, whenever you send it, even with the weekly, you're going to get unsubscribes.
Right.
So going from sending once a week to sending 6 times a week,
that's 6 chances to unsubscribe a week.
6 times as many unsubscribes. So, I'm not going to say that it hasn't had an impact. Like overall, maybe it shrunk my list 5%.
Okay.
But the connection it's created, being in people's inbox every day, like the positives, my personal opinion is the people that have left probably weren't all that into my newsletter to begin with. So it's been a good trade-off.
Yeah, it's almost like you did the thing that happens when you reconfirm people who haven't been on our end. It's people who haven't clicked. Like I can go in and see like, who are the people who haven't clicked a single link in my newsletter in 6 months? I'm going to try to reconfirm them. I'm putting them in like what's the place between heaven and hell? But what's the place between heaven and hell? Purgatory.
Purgatory.
Yeah, like they're like in this area, and they've got to decide, right? And so it's almost like you like prompted that same consideration, like, I was in this boat, but now am I willing to get to keep traveling in it, because it's making more. It's the local.
Yeah, and I've always been more I've always been more focused on the opens than the total number of subscribers anyway. And so, to be honest, like the total number of subscribers may have dipped some, but the opens are basically the same. So I don't think it's like what it's costing me is people that probably were not really paying attention anyway. And it's one thing to not pay attention when you get an email once a week. If you're not paying attention, you're getting it every day, you're going to be like, I'm out of here. So I actually, part of me was like, yeah, okay, this is like, I kind of want to run these people off anyway. So I love it. There's no point for having them on the list if they're not really, opening and whatever. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's not that it doesn't come with a cost, but to me, the upside far outweighs the cost, and which I guess sort of leads into the kind of engagement piece and the link clicks, and then also how it's impacted my ad product. So really early on, and this is also one of the reasons I did it, the click-through rate when I share links is massive on the weekday editions compared to the Sunday edition. So for example, I get more total link clicks on a weekday edition that has one link than I do a Sunday edition that has like 12 or 15 links total.
Interesting.
The other thing is if I share, and by the way, I don't, with the exception of my own blog post, which sometimes I'll send as a weekday one and feature in the Sunday, for the most part, they're different.
Okay.
But when I have done that, the same exact link going to the same exact people in the weekday edition will get 4 times as many clicks as it will in the Sunday edition.
So it's that whole like, what do I have time for? Or is one CTA
it's just
like
focused,
a lot easier?
Right. What do I have time for? It's focused attention. It's shortened descriptions of them in some cases. You know, look, at times they're a little clickbaity. So that can help. But I think it's more so, it's a huge difference, which means also it's a huge difference in my ability to drive traffic to my own stuff, to other people's stuff, to, you know, so that's a massive advantage. And that has then spilled over in the weekday editions. So in my Sunday newsletter, I have basically classified ads. So there are 5 a week, and it's a section sort of in the middle of the newsletter. The copy is written by the sponsor or the advertiser. There's like one sentence, you know, with a link. In the weekday edition, there's the one paragraph, whatever that day's issue is, and then there's a 1-line ad below it that it says today's email is sponsored by, and it's not the company name. It's I write the copy in the weekday issues. So it might be like today's email, like, so I think today was like today's email is sponsored by a tool that will help you with your Shopify store, something like that, right? Those ads are massively successful. So way more successful, and there's only one. So way more successful than the Sunday. So it's made my ad product significantly better, because what I decided to do was I now sell, when you buy an ad or sponsor my newsletter, you get a mention in the Sunday newsletter and you're the sole sponsor of one of the following weekday issues. Okay. So it's sort of like a 2-for-1. And at the moment I'm charging $100 for them. So for $100, you get both those ad spots. But it has pushed my, the weekday, you know, so the weekday issues now, like my advertisers, I think on average are getting like 150 clicks between the 2 ads. So they're getting 150 clicks for $100 on average. I had someone promote their newsletter last week. They got 80 subscribers out of it. And so it's been so it has made the product, my ad product, way more valuable and successful, which is another, like I had already tested, so I knew it's another reason why I merged them. Like I saw I was getting massive clicks even when there were 2,000 people or 1,500 getting it. So I was like, if I start sending this to 18,000, you know, this is going to drive real. And I think there's a lot of reasons. One is, again, there's not a lot of links. It's like they're one sponsor. I also think, you know, I'm biased, but I also think like me writing the ad copy probably helps.
Can we talk about you writing the ad copy for a minute? I would call what you described almost like a curiosity ad, because Absolutely. you're describing the function of the advertiser. But if someone is really curious what that brand is, they've got to click to see, right? Like the brand is not mentioned.
Right. When I'm writing that copy, I'm writing it specifically because I want to drive people. Now it's relevant, right? Like I'm not trying to like bait and switch people, right? But yes, it's absolutely curiosity based. And I am trying to drive people into their work, people who it's relevant for, into their world to be exposed to their thing. It is not, if you're looking for like quote unquote brand advertising, like I just want people to see my brand name, you're going to get that. You can get it in the Sunday issue because you're writing your own thing, but the daily, that's not what I'm trying to do. So for example, I have two big email platforms I just recently bought ads in my newsletter. So when their ads run in the daily, I'm going to mention email platform and sort of their, and my copy is inspired by their copy. So it is their sort of sales pitch and their unique hook, but I'm not going to actually put their brand name there because that's not what it's about. I'm not going to say, go check out, whatever. Like for example, with you guys, like I wouldn't say, go check out Curated, blah, 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 blah. I would say, today's email is sponsored by an amazing tool if you want to run a curated newsletter or something like that, right? Something like, or a tool that's going to help it make it easier for you to run your newsletter or whatever the sort of hook was. So yeah, that definitely helps with the clicks. But it's, also at the end of the day, like clicks are great, but it's, like I said, it's not bait and switch. It's got to convert. So, they're converting, and that's why people are buying and buying again.
Yeah, I'm wondering from the marketing side of that, placing that ad, because the brilliance of selling ads partially comes from being able to get into the head of the buyer and figure out what you're giving them that they want, is that if you're driving them to a particular landing page that is really relevant for that newsletter's audience, you're getting the potential to convert them on that page, but you also are getting the potential to now get them in a retargeting campaign or get them subscribed to whatever content that company is putting out, et cetera. So I think it battles, like you're turning the gears here, right? Because it kind of battles the concept of newsletter creators going like, hey, it doesn't matter if they click, they're seeing your brand, right? If you advertised in my newsletter for 6 months, they would learn everything they needed to know about your brand to make a decision, right? It's changing that. And it's saying like, if we do this curiosity ad, there's a good chance that now you are part of the digital ecosystem that they're in, right? They're going to start seeing your brand more because they jumped this one hurdle.
Absolutely. And I think it's not that one's necessarily better and worse. I think it's a question of like, what is the brand or the buyer looking for, right? Like it's, this is more of a, I don't know if direct response is the right word, but like, it's not brand advertising, right? It's not like, and by the way, like it's structured in both of my newsletters. I don't do logos for brands. There's no image. There's no, like, to me, like I want people to see my brand.
It's for people who read.
Right. It's like, this is right. Exactly. This is a one. And for this, it's like, I want, and by the way, it's also why my audience really likes these ads. I don't ever get complaints about them in the Sunday one or the weekly one.
All right. From the people who are like too many ads.
Yeah. Kind of like it's another reason why I think they work really well is because, the truth is most of this stuff is relevant to them. In the ones that I'm writing, I'm explaining it in a way, again, I'm never bait and switching, or I'm never being, today's email is sponsored by this amazing thing you've got to see. Like, I'm not doing that.
Oh gosh. Cringe.
And I'm not charging by the click. I'm just saying, like, when a brand or sponsor comes in, I know, I'm like, okay, I want us both to win. So like at the end of the day, I could give them 1,000 clicks, but if none of it converts, what's the point, right? So I know basically what their goal is, and I'm trying to get my audience, to as many as possible, to go to wherever it is they want them to go, because they're going to sell them there better than I am,
So let's transition back to this content strategy.
Yes.
For a focused daily that is paired with a digest weekend edition. Like that's what I would call it. And it's like very little overlap. You said sometimes your own.
Yeah, for the most part, there's no overlap.
All right. So we can talk about like click rates and open rates, and like, if you want to share numbers, that's great. Sounds like they they improved, right? Even though you dropped off a certain amount of subscribers who weren't the daily crowd, right?
Yeah.
The content itself and producing it, the way you're doing it almost feels to me like someone who's pressuring themselves to like come up with one social media post a day kind of vibe. How was that transition and getting into that? I know you were active on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, again, there's a couple things. So for me, it's relatively easy, number one, because to go to this daily, I didn't have to add any like search for content time, right? I already see all this stuff for curating things in my weekly newsletter. Like I didn't have to specifically go, oh, I got to go find new stuff. Right. I already consume all sorts of stuff. So to do the daily, the only additional time it was going to take me was to write up a paragraph a day, basically. Right. It wasn't going to take me, if I was someone who had no newsletters and was starting from scratch, I think one of their big concerns would be like, how am I going to find stuff to share? Right. I don't have that issue because I already have, for 5 years, I've been finding stuff and all of that. The other thing is this format, and this is what I mean, whereas like it gave me a place to put stuff that I wouldn't necessarily have any place to put, right? So for example, if I was listening to like David Crosby, who was on the Howard Stern show, right? And he said some little like throwaway story about how like Joni Mitchell years ago said to him, like, you need to write down every idea you have, because if you don't write it down, it didn't happen, right? That's a cool little tidbit. It doesn't really fit to go in my newsletter. Like it's not sort of big, and it's like a little kind of, like I said, like a little tidbit. But for this, it's perfect. Because in a couple sentences, I can go, oh, Joni Mitchell told David Crosby to blah, 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 blah. So you might want to start writing down your ideas, right? So it gave me an outlet for, and I consume a lot of stuff, whether it's podcasts or TV, movies, YouTube videos, whatever, right? But it gave me an outlet. I watched another example, like I watched an interview on YouTube with, I think it was like David Ogilvy, like the advertising, guy, an old interview with him. Well, he might have said 3 things in there that were interesting. And that's 3 issues of the daily, right? Like, oh, David Ogilvy, now I'll spread them out. So it's not like all David Ogilvy all the time, but so because it's so small and simple and short, all these little things now have a place, right? Whereas like the David Crosby story, like I probably wouldn't write a whole blog post about that. It's probably not something I'd link to in my newsletter and go, oh, go watch this, hour-long Howard Stern thing because David Crosby said you should write stuff down. But as like, as like a couple sentences, it's a cool, interesting tidbit. So that's part of the content process. It's given me a home for sort of all these little things. Very low pressure because it only needs to be a couple sentences and be interesting. When I listen to podcasts, right? Like, oh, that person said this. It's very easy for me to go, oh, here's a really clever sales technique that this person talked about at the 35-minute of this podcast, right? Easy. The other thing, and I didn't do this at first, but I've now realized it, is I have, I've written 270 issues of my newsletter, each of which had 5 to 10 curated ideas, and I've written a blog post a week for 6 years. So I have this massive archive of content that I now started to actually systematically go back through and go, oh, that thing from 4 years ago that nobody's seen would work as like a 1 paragraph. So I'm able, it's now created a way for me to recycle some of my archival, both original stuff and curated stuff, which I wouldn't necessarily put it in my Sunday newsletter because I feel like, I've already been there, done that. But
I
for
like
this,
that. Yeah, because I think especially when brands think about that kind of stuff, like there is certain information that when I think I've termed this before. It's like how to be episodic, but still bring back like former storylines.
Yeah.
Right. That need to like, because you're being episodic, but somebody jumps in.
Yeah, they haven't seen
mid show, right? Like, or like, you know, like in season 3 of this newsletter kind of thing. And so
yeah, and I think again, even without a daily or whatever, I think that's, I'm huge on repurposing content of all sorts, in both from a resharing standpoint and even just like repurposing and making big things small and small things big. And like, and you know, I think most people don't get anywhere near the value they should out of their content. I think they create it, they share it once, and you know, whatever. But from a newsletter perspective, you know, if I got, let's say I got 1,000 new subscribers last month, I have 200 and, you know, they've seen my last 4 issues. I have 265 issues, 2,600 individual articles and ideas, most of which have multiple things within them that they have never seen. And I know which of those worked really well and resonated. I know which word clicked, you know, I could, if I, you know, so if I wanted, I could, and you know, I could go, all right, let me look at the newsletter let me look at the newsletter I sent 2 years ago this week. Oh, this was the most clicked thing. Chances are, if I restructure that and share that, especially, and I think this is another thing for me just in general, like I'm a huge proponent of like evergreen content. So almost everything I share in my newsletter is not, it's not news, it's not time sensitive. I like, for example, I won't share, if Twitter releases a new feature, that's not going to go in my newsletter, because I know that, like, okay, that's relevant for like a minute. You know, my stuff is much more, certainly the stuff that I create and most of the stuff I curate is almost all of it is not time sensitive, right? So, you know, I would be way more likely to share, you know, here's the process to craft a great tweet than I would, here's the new feature that Twitter rolled out.
So one question that went through my head when we were talking about this process of creating the daily, the 1 paragraph newsletter, is, can you describe to me the difference in drafting that and sending it to an opted in subscriber and drafting that and posting it to a social media?
Yeah, and so this is, it's so funny that you said that, because that was that was actually the next place I was going to go. This is the other thought that I had, sort of, that was behind when I was doing this originally, right? Anything that I would tweet, I'll be lucky if it reaches 10% of my followers because of the algorithms and everything else. That same content sent to an email list is going to reach way more people. And this is even more true when you start talking about links to articles, which the social platforms really don't like. The algorithms really penalize, right? So when I write a blog post, it's a perfect example. Like I did one, I think today's email was one, but so I can share that link on Twitter, and even with 15,000 followers or whatever I have, you know, I'll be lucky if it gets 50 clicks. And not because it's not good, but just because Twitter's not going to show it to anybody. Right? I can send that to my email list and I'll drive 1,500 people there easily. So some of this is me going, I'm going to take this stuff. It is in some ways thinking about it like social posts. Like a lot of this would be stuff that you would post on social, but the link, no one's going to see it. And so I've sort of created my own social network in a way. I know that's a weird, like, it's sort of a weird way to think about it. But like, I do think, you know, I think I even tweeted something yesterday where I said, I was like, you know, and it's inspired by what I'm seeing with this daily, like, you know, if you have time to tweet every day, you could be sending a newsletter every day. And you'd reach more people with the exact same thing. And again, as it all comes back to like, as long as it's valuable and fits a specific audience, you know, let's be honest, a lot of tweets are not valuable and aren't that good anyway. So even if people got it in their email, they wouldn't like it. But if you're creating stuff that's good and valuable and relevant to people, it will work. But yeah, I absolutely think it is very much like social posts, but the difference is I control the audience and can get it to more people. I'm not penalized for, you know, it being a link.
You know, what it reminds me of is, gosh, I feel like it was like 2008-ish, when magazines were doing this thing where they were posting content online, but then they had bloggers. And they would have like they were trying to like figure out what is a magazine when it's digital.
Right.
And so they were doing like if it was a home and garden magazine, they would be doing like a gardening blog on Monday and a travel blog on Tuesday. And, you know, like they had a different writer slated for a different day, etc. And I often think of when people go daily, like you can play with it and have the same category every day. Or you could come in and be like if I were to convert opt-in weekly to daily, it would be like, what is the best newsletter tip I could put in on Monday? What is the best marketing news Tuesday kind of thing? But I think it gives people a lot of room to kind of explore and test which content their readership is most interested in.
Well, it's interesting because I was talking to someone who was asking, they had seen what I was doing, and he was asking, he was like, oh, I'm thinking about maybe trying a version of this and sort of going daily. And he was saying sort of what you were saying, right? He's like, so maybe like Monday will be my marketing tip and Tuesday will be my sales tip and you know, whatever. And my advice to him was actually, you know, what I said is I was like, it's fine if in your own mind, you want to, as an organizing principle, you want to sort of label that. I actually, and I could be wrong, I don't know, but like, I was like, I actually recommend not outwardly labeling it like that, because number one, I was like, you're going to sort of, you might back yourself into a corner unnecessarily. Like you might want the freedom to be able to do whatever. But number two, I was like, what you want is, if people start to think Monday's marketing, Tuesday's sales, Wednesday's social media, whatever, it might actually hurt your opens, because at some point they go, I'm into marketing and I'm into social media, but I don't really care about sales. So I'm not really going to bother opening that Tuesday one. Like and this is my own, you know, personal preference, but like, I kind of find like, I want people to open, because look, mine covers a lot of different territory. I mean, it's all for the same audience in general, whatever. But sometimes they're, you know, sometimes it's inspiring, sometimes it's very tactical, some, you know, like there's different sort of buckets or categories that are going to resonate with different people. But I want them in the habit of opening every day, because there might be something in there, or probably more often than not, there's going to be something that they like. I don't want them to sort of know Monday's and, you know, whatever, Monday's inspiring and Tuesday's tactical, and I don't care about tactical. So yeah, very interesting. Like I think what you're playing a lot into is this delivering what I would call like a treasure. Like there's a curiosity when it's just a subject line in your inbox. And the whole thing, it's funny you were talking about this in the ad copy context, but like it is these dailies are heavily built on curiosity, right? In curiosity and habit. I want them in the habit of opening it, of reading it every morning. I want them in the habit. I want them to be curious. So even like my subject lines and even the way I write, again, not clickbaity and not like bait and switch, but curiosity, right? So like, I'm just looking at like the headlines of the stuff I have scheduled for next week, right? Or the subject lines, right? So so one is opportunities and responsibilities. One is the most retweeted word. That's sort of specific. One is just wow. One is the simplest way to make your story way more interesting. and then one is Rick Rubin's Trick to Free Your Mind. So they're sort of curiosity provoking, they sort of tell you what they are, but they also, for the most, it's interesting, like once in a while there'll be more specifics. And, so I did one, it was actually to a link to my own blog post, I think last week. And it was, how to read more books or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fine and it got lots of clicks, but the open rate was actually low because it was so specific that, which is fine in that case, because that is a very sort of specific thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to drive curiosity, not necessarily be so specific that, if you're not interested in reading more books, you're never going to open that.
Right. So then there's this kind of balance you have to achieve, right? Because I sent my CEO I think I sent him a Slack one time, and it was like, hey, we need to meet or something. Mm-hmm. And he and I were talking about the psychology around like how you ask someone for something, like what the subject line of that message is, right? And he was like, I knew it wasn't something serious,
right?
Because if it was super serious, you would be like, we need to meet about this thing, right? Because you want to prep someone before you're having that meeting, right? And so I think of subject lines that way too. And there's the balance between I want you to be curious and I don't want you to be disappointed.
Yeah, and I think, and I think that also goes to, and this is sort of the bigger picture thing or the bigger goal, right? Like, especially, I mean, with any newsletter, but especially with the daily, like I am trying to develop a relationship and trust with this audience, right? Mm-hmm. So I want them, because look, if the subject lines are sort of vague and they open it 5 times, maybe it gets them to open it, but 5 times in a row they open it and there's nothing in it that they like or is relevant to them, they're going to be gone, right? And I think this is the other thing in terms of how I schedule these things. I'm very, I don't have specific like days slotted, like this day is this, but I'm very conscious. I typically draft them like a week at a time. So like 5 at a time. And I'm very conscious of the blend, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to have 5 marketing tactics one after another.
Right.
So it's like, okay, I want, if Monday is sort of something, if Monday's something about that's going to appeal to people who want like writing advice, there's probably not going to be another thing that's specifically about writing that week, right? Mm-hmm. Tuesday might be something about productivity. Wednesday might be something about marketing. Like, so my goal is I need to build a relationship. And this is, again, true with any newsletter, like, to build a relationship with them and to deliver relevant value to them enough that, that they're assuming, I want them to assume if they open it, it's probably going to be something they like. Mm-hmm. The other thing about the sort of not wanting to scare them off with a specific subject line is now that every issue also has an ad, that ad may be relevant to them. Mm-hmm. So how to read more books, if you're like, I'm not opening that because I don't want to know how to read more books, you don't realize that there's an ad in that that's about how to become a better writer. And maybe you are interested in how to become a better writer, right? So that's the other thing, is that even though they're sort of one item newsletters with the ad, there's actually 2 items. And so I don't want to, I want them to open, basically,
Yeah. Okay. So here's my big final question. Cause I'm still a journalist. I don't think you've like evolved from not being one, or into, or whatever correct pronunciation along those lines is going to be. But like my big question is 250 something issues in. Mm-hmm. What along the way was your biggest challenge?
It's a good question.
Aside from booking this interview.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I wouldn't say, to be completely honest, I don't think, people like always ask me, they're like, oh my God, like, how do you do that? Like every week without, whatever. That sort of consistency actually hasn't been all that difficult for me. Because number one, I really like doing it. It probably doesn't take me as long as other people think. Again, I've sort of got systems, and I sort of know how to do it at this point. But the other thing, and I would say this to people, is like, and I know this isn't quite answering your question, but I will get back to that. But at the end of the day, so a couple things, like to do something consistent, 270 times or whatever, I said, it's like, you're only doing it once a week. You're doing it one time 270 times. You're publishing one newsletter 270 times. So I don't think about how am I going to get to 500. Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking about how am I going to do it this week. So some of that is just mindset. I think a lot of times people set out and they go, oh, I'll never get to, I've done 3, I'm never going to get to 100 issues. And it's like, don't worry about 100 issues, like worry about issue 4, So I think that is, that mindset and that approach is certainly part of it. What has been challenging for me is, there's no figuring out what your newsletter should be or what you want it to be is not it's an infinite game. So I'm constantly thinking about, is there a better way to do this? What do I want to get out of this? Am I getting what I want? Am I, and that takes a lot of forms, everything from, are there things I could or should be doing to get more subscribers? Are there things I could or should be doing to get more opens or engagement? Are there ways that I want to monetize this? I mean, again, going back to the beginning, like I had written it for, I think 4 years before I directly monetized it at all. Right. So, and then there are ads, and then there's, maybe I want to do like a paid newsletter, and, and even most recently, like this shift to the daily, right? Like I'm constantly trying to solve the puzzle, but there's no end point. So I think, there's never going to be a point where I'm like, oh, it's done, I've cracked it. Like this, this is it. And that's part of the fun. I think it's part of what draws me to it, is I'm always tinkering and experimenting and learning and trying to go like, oh, it's interesting when I present it this way, more people click it, or I get more replies, or more people purchase, or whatever. And then, so that is, in terms of a challenge, like it's sort of an ongoing, but I think a lot of times people don't think about it that way. Like they're like, how am I going to solve it? Like, when's it going to be over? Okay, now I've made it, I've done it. You see it a lot also with like subscribers, right? Like, everyone is, when you have 100 subscribers, you're like, oh my God, if I could just get 1,000, right? But then you get 1,000 and you're like, well, but there's people with 10,000, and there's people with 50,000, 100, that like, you're never, like, there's people with massive lists that still are probably going, but those people have a million subscribed, so I think especially early on, there's that mindset of like, when I get to that point, I'll be set. Like I'll have won the game, and it's like, there is no winning the game. Like it's infinite.
Oh, you have made me dig into like these thoughts that cycle in my head about like how as people we have to become okay with the never ending story, like the always evolving, the
and you
core.
have to enjoy
you have to like kind of find joy in that. Your newsletter evolves.
Yeah.
Like I see people crippled by the first send.
Yep.
Like just
Well, that's the other thing. They feel like they have to solve it before they even start. And it's
yes.
like, whatever you do is going to evolve. Yeah.
I am pro, like, no, like newsletter is a great MVP.
Right.
Even if newsletter is not what your ultimate goal is. Mm-hmm. Like newsletter, can I get people to subscribe? Can I throw up a landing page with a value prop mm-hmm. and get people interested in it? And then after they're interested in it, can I get them to engage with it? And if you're able to do that, like, then can it evolve? Are they also interested in this, or should I stick with this? Or like, you know, like which of my content categories is performing best? Right. And I see a lot of people grasping at this idea of community.
Yeah.
And you have a strong Facebook community. I don't think every brand and every product needs a community.
Also, community is way harder than people realize.
I think newsletter
and way more time consuming.
Yeah, I think newsletter in its own way is community.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that goes back to what I was saying, where it's like what you really like. It's funny, like people say community, but I actually think it'd be better off focus on relationship. You want a collection of individual relationships with readers. Community can be its own sort of separate thing, but I think if you're focused on how do I have a good relationship with my audience where they trust me and I provide value to them and we have exchanges at times, and yeah, ultimately that can grow into a community where you're connecting them to each other. Like there is value to community. I'm not sort of downplaying community, but I think sort of like the best communities are going to start off as sort of these individual relationships. And I think a lot of times people miss that. You know, they launch a thing and they're like, join our paid community. And I'm like, they don't even like you. Like, they don't even like your newsletter. Like, what do you like? You want them to pay for your community. Why don't you start with like, they actually like the things you're putting out into the world? Mm-hmm. You know, the other thing I just thought of from a challenge perspective, again, because people are so obsessed over subscriber numbers and stuff. And I think this is something they also don't realize, that as you get bigger, I think it might have even been James Clear talking about this, but I'm seeing this now, and I saw it with the, you know, I saw it with the Daily. Like, no matter how good your newsletter is, and no matter how much people love it, every time you send it, some people are going to unsubscribe. The bigger the list, the more people are going to unsubscribe. So before I went daily, like when I would send my weekly newsletter on Sunday, I'd probably get like at least like, let's say 50 people would unsubscribe every time, right? Which is fine. Although, you know, there's a lot of people who'd be like, oh my God, I would feel terrible if 50 people, which I understand, like it's not the ideal. Although I do sort of have the mindset of like, it doesn't mean it's bad, it's just not for them. Like if I send it to 18,000 people and 50 unsubscribe, well, 17,950 didn't. Like that's, you know, that's fine. But what's interesting, especially when you know, now that I go daily, so if I'm losing, and I'm not losing 50 with every send on the weekday, but like, you know, whatever, let's say if I lose 20, right? If I lose 20 on each of those daily sends, I'm losing 100 a week. And then let's say I lose 50 on Sunday. So I'm losing 150 subscribers a week. So if you want to grow, I have to get 150 new subscribers a week just to break even. Right. And I'm only at like 18,000. So when you take someone that's like 50, you know, like let's say like James Clear or whatever, right? You know, if you have and this is what he talked about, he's like, you reach a point where it's basically, even with paid, it's almost impossible to grow. Because if you have 100,000 subscribers, and let's say every time you send it, 1,000 people unsubscribe, you need to bring in 1,000 just to break even.
Yeah. So it's like a plateau point.
Right. So it's like, so that growth. So I think that's, you know, and again, not that it can't happen, but I think sometimes people don't necessarily think about that, what it takes to grow once you get to a certain level. On the one hand, it seems easier because you have more people to spread the word about it, but you also need to account for all the, you know, all the people that are just going to unsubscribe every time you send it. So I've started to see that, like, so in part, and especially like when you clean your list and whatever, you know, I have an article that I wrote a few years ago that was about like how I got to 25,000 subscribers. Like my list is smaller now than it was a few years ago. It's better, it's higher quality. Like I don't feel, my newsletter is not shrinking. I can feel the positive momentum, but that's why, that's why, right? But I think there's a lot of people, again, people get hung up on the subscriber number, which I think is way less important than like the open number and all the other, it all depends on what your goals are. But like, I'm way less work, like I said, part of this is I was like, I know that this is going to run some people off and I want to, like, I'm like, I don't need, I don't need.
They're not your market.
Yeah, I don't
If it
really
runs them off,
want
they're not
the
your market.
casual, like, okay, you're on my list and once every 6 months by the way, just a quick story about this that is funny. So a while ago, I did like a re-engagement campaign for people that hadn't opened in a while. Actually, it was more than a while ago. It was like over a year ago, right?
It's all relative.
Yeah, exactly. But I got a reply a year later from a guy replying to that email going like, I'm still interested, I still want it. And I was like, first of all, I don't know what's going on with that guy that he just got to his email like a year later. And there was no reference to like, sorry, it's taken me so long to get back. He's been removed and off the list for like at least like 9-10 months, whatever. But it was so, I was like, I don't even know what to say.
Well, can you think of anything as we wrap that you would tell, especially people who are in like the early stages of launching or in like their first year and they're in that place where they're trying to figure out growth. And I always like for veteran newsletter creators to kind of give the advice they wish they would have heard at those early stages.
I think there's a couple things. I think number one is I think people wait too long to start. They would just start. Like you'll figure it out as you go. You're not really going to figure anything out until you start putting it out there. The second thing is I think especially with beginners, they obsess over like what tech platform, what email provider, and no offense, but the truth is like I actually think it's the least important decision in a newsletter. Like most of them have mostly similar features. You'll be fine with any of them. You can always switch if you don't like it or you want something else. Like I get asked all the time, like, because people get paralyzed that they're going to make a mistake, right? If I choose this platform or the other platform, and I'm like, just pick one and you'll be like, you should be more concerned about like, what do I want to get out of this? What am I going to say? Like, again, like I think people get paralyzed by that, which is totally understandable. But in most cases, they're all fine. And it's also a decision that you can always switch if you want down the road.
I'm glad you brought that up because our team talks about this frequently. And like we have a real desire to be considered a tool that enables creation. Not like the content strategy behind your newsletter or a social platform that is you're beholden to or something along those lines. And so we talk a lot about like how to get out of the way of those things and just like empower the workflow.
Yeah. And I think look, it's understandably intimidating for lots of people. But I think for them to hear, don't worry, like you're not doomed. If like whatever decision, it's like, I think a lot of them think like, oh, if I choose the wrong thing, it's never going to work. And I think they put a lot of pressure on themselves to make that decision. I think it's helpful for them to hear like, no, you're going to be fine.
The platform you choose is not going to make or break your newsletter. It is the content you deliver.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, that's absolutely true. And I think also that, the subtle differences that there are between different platforms, the truth is you're not really going to know which is the best fit for you until you're up and running and have a sense for what you're doing with your newsletter, right? It's like, once you get a better sense for like, this is the kind of stuff I'm sharing and what I'm writing, you're going to better be able to figure out oh, it'd be nice to have this feature, or it'd be nice to have that feature, or like, I don't need all these other features that this platform offers. Like, it's tough to know that before you've started. So I think that is a big one. Another bit of advice I give to people is, initially, I think you should try to set a output goal, not an outcome goal. So don't worry about don't worry about how many subscribers. Just be like, I want to publish a newsletter 10 times or whatever it is, right? That's completely in your control. So if you're measuring your quote unquote success based on, I'm going to publish 10 newsletters in the next 10 weeks or 10 months or whatever it is, right? That's all you're measuring. So you're not agonizing over, why aren't people subscribing? What's my open rate? What's my click? Like, that's not your goal. Your goal was to do it 10 times, and literally nothing can prevent you from doing it 10 times, as opposed to the other stuff, which is ultimately out of your control. The other thing I like about that approach is, when you pick a sort of set output up front, you then also put a pin in the constant, is this working? Is it not? Should I quit? You go, my goal is to do 10 of these. And after 10, I'm going to regroup and go, do I like doing this? Is it working? Is it not working? Do I want to continue? Do I want to do another 10? Do I want, like, it? Because that's the other thing. People are, I think, almost right from the start going,
how can I monetize this?
Right, exactly.
I haven't seen an issue yet, but I'm expecting.
Should I quit? Why isn't this working? Like, all of that stuff. And I think that all of that is sort of a distraction. The other thing, the last thing I think I would say to people is, and this goes kind of along with the output thing, I've gotten a ton of value out of my newsletter. I've grown an audience. It's the foundation of almost all of my consulting clients come through my newsletter in some way, shape, or form. Like, it is the foundation of my whole business. And now I even make money from it as well. So I've gotten tons of value out of it. It's been amazing. That said, by far the most valuable thing I've gotten out of my newsletter is what I have learned as a result of curating this information every week. If nobody ever read it and I never made $1 on it, I would still be doing it, because, over the course of, the real value of having done this for 270 weeks in a row is, I have found, consumed, absorbed, communicated, and summarized 2,700, almost 3,000 ideas about how to produce, promote, and profit from your creations over the course of the past 5 or 6 years. And that's just the ones that I've actually featured in the newsletter. That doesn't count all the other stuff that didn't make the cut that I still learned from. And what I never would have anticipated or realized before I started this is, I think because of the repetition of, so basically, let's say I come across an article, I read it, I'm like, oh, that might be a good fit for my newsletter. Then later that week, I'm like, yeah, I am going to do that. So I read it again to sort of summarize it, right? Then I share it, and maybe I share it on social, whatever. That consumption and absorption of these ideas, I have almost instant recall of anything that's been in my newsletter. Unlike books that I've read, unlike conversations and stuff I've read that wasn't in my newsletter, that knowledge that I've gained, and this is sort of a forcing function to learn things, has been so incredibly valuable in my work as a consultant and all the stuff outside the newsletter, because it allowed, people are always like, how do you know that? And I'm like, oh, it was in my newsletter 4 years ago. And here's the article about it that this guy wrote. And that, I think, in my conversations with like people that are starting newsletters, they never think about it. They're always obsessed with the sort of external success metrics. And I'm like, look, if you write whatever your niche or your business or your industry is, and this is also why I love curated newsletters in general, like, if you curate a newsletter every week for a year, the expertise that you will develop, even if nobody reads it, is massive. It's the most valuable part of the whole thing. And I say that as someone who's gotten a ton of value from the sort of external stuff, but it doesn't even compare to like the value of what I've learned from doing it.
100% agree.
Yeah.
I used to think of it like, at some point in my life, I was like, oh, wouldn't it be great to just like go to college every 4 years and start a new major and just dive in and like learn everything there is to know about anthropology, learn everything there is to know about this topic.
Yep.
And the mindset behind that is like an eagerness to learn and absorb and right. But what I think of when I think of curated newsletters and what you said, which is you have instant recall, like, you know, and I do that all the time. I'm like, oh, you should read this article. Like if you mentioned this problem, like I've got something in my archives for you. Like it's stored up here, you know, under this file. The thing about that is that you have to have read it and connected with it enough to have then created in a paragraph or a sentence, a thesis as the reason why your reader you read it. So like it took me a long time to realize that not everyone is on the same playing field when it comes to being able to summarize content.
Yeah.
But if you are looking to up that skill set and to get into the mindset of the person who is your target audience, et cetera, I think like marketing teams could flourish from having their team, even if it's an internal newsletter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like here are the topics our persona cares about this week or all time, and to like dive into that and be able to say like, this is why this is important to this person. Like, this is why this matters.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you genuinely can make yourself an expert on a subject. And then the other thing that maybe doesn't always happen, but often or usually happens is, you know, because look, here's the difference. I could not publish a newsletter. I could have a diary where I did the exact same thing, right? Where I just read a bunch of stuff and summarized it and I didn't put it out there. And I would get a lot of that same knowledge value. The piece I wouldn't get is by publishing it, you then also you don't just become an expert, you become perceived as an expert. If I didn't have a newsletter, you would not be talking to me about my newsletter expertise, even if I had newsletter expertise, right? That's the difference. I think there's a lot of people that learn, this is why even I don't understand, like, you know, if you're someone that reads tons of books and maybe you take notes on those books or you highlight stuff, why you would not publish those highlighted experts or the notes or whatever, I don't understand, because it's just a way to create opportunities and go, oh, wow, that guy knows a lot about that topic. Whereas otherwise people don't know, right? So I think there's the getting the value, but then there's also the, it's not just learning, it's communicating what you learn. And it's also allowing the world to see you as someone who has learned all this stuff.
Right. You're consuming on their behalf in a way. Like it's really on your
let alone helping and providing
on your behalf, right? But the value of curation is that you have taken the time to ascertain the value of the piece of content that you're sharing. I think we're the same way. I have 300 links that I decided didn't belong, but I haven't trashed yet.
Oh, me too. For you. Like I don't even look at them. I'm like, oh God. No, absolutely. And what's funny, and this is why I brought it up in the context of someone that's just starting out. Everyone that runs a newsletter for a while knows this and will say the exact same thing that I said and sort of you just echoed. But people that haven't done it yet, they don't know. They don't get it. They like, and I'm not blaming them for it, right? But it's like you just have no idea how valuable that piece of it is because you don't see it. You see the people that are like, oh, they have built a huge audience and look at how much money they're making from their thing and whatever. Like you kind of see that. So you can assume like, oh, it'd be valuable to get that, but you don't see how much the people that are doing this learn and know. And it really is yeah, anytime I talk to someone, you know, that's done a newsletter for a while on any topic, they get it. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe the competitive advantage it builds for you in whatever sort of business or market you're in from a knowledge standpoint it's just massive.
Agreed. You know, I sometimes relate it to like being a beat reporter, because you can move to a new town and be assigned the city council meeting beat, and you would know more about that town's government in 3 months than the people who have lived there for 10 years, because you're intentionally tuning your ear in to that topic. And I think that that's what curating a newsletter for a specific audience does for that person. Wonderful. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think that that rarely gets articulated in a like benefits of starting a newsletter.
Well, and it also, if you're new and you can wrap your head around that, it removes so much of the pressure, right? Because people you literally cannot fail if your goal is, I want to learn a lot and I want to do this for a certain number of times.
So here's an interesting thing. If you've heard this before, just stop me. But I interviewed Dave Verwer, who created Curated. He's like the OG founder. And we've had conversations about what do you regret? You know, like, and to this day, he regrets that they added sponsorships. There's a sponsorship support workflow because before that was part of it, everyone who was on the platform was there to like,
it wasn't about
create their newsletter.
Right.
Yeah. But the second it was an option, then monetization became like a focus instead of a byproduct. And you know, his stance, our stance is build an audience and then build the appropriate sponsorship.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. That's why for me, I sort of did that to myself. That's why for like 4 or 5 years, I had no ads.
It's a time period during which you're earning the trust of your readership. So yeah, like I think that.
And even now I have ads that are, again, like, you know, designed to help and provide value to my audience. And they're not, you know, they're not really interrupted. Like they're very sort of integrated into it. Yeah. So I totally.
Yeah. His premise was like, I wish that we had built in some kind of way for them to have to qualify.
Right. Right.
To sell it, but like that would be way too complicated, right? What if you're shifting from another platform and you just already have advertised, you know, like, so there's no way to like govern that. Like the software shouldn't govern that, but it did change the like, the engagement with the user, right? Because the support conversations became like, why don't I have advertisers?
Right.
Instead of like, what could I improve about my newsletter or things along those lines. Yeah. So wonderful conversation with you today. Thank you for joining us. Everyone go check out fortheinterested.com. Josh's newsletter is there. You can subscribe to, if you subscribe there, you're going to be subscribed to the Sunday edition and the weekday edition. Yep. And if you're a newsletter creator and you like Facebook groups, go join the Newsletter Creators Facebook group. Lots of good conversations going on in there. You can get inspiration from other creators. You can ask questions about content strategy, advertising, paid newsletters, platforms, all those things. And Josh has like a healthy group of people who are like willing to have those conversations.
There's a lot of great people in there, and ranging from people that are just about to start their first newsletter to people that have literally, there's a guy in there who's published since I think like 1996 or something.
Yay!
So yeah, it's a wide range.
The dichotomy of newsletter creators. Wonderful to have you. Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you.